Hello everyone and welcome to Beginner's Code. Today we are going to be looking at creating the front end for a contact form. So the first thing that I've done is I've created a contact form folder, and there's two files in there, an index.html and a main.css. Both of these files are empty. So what we're going to do first is we will just start out the HTML file. And what we're going to do is we'll use the HTML5 boilerplate. And now we just need to create in the body a div, and we'll call this box. And then we need to create a form, and we don't need an action for this because it's not actually linking up to any backend. We don't actually want the form to go anywhere or redirect anywhere once it's done. So for now we can leave that out, but we will provide a method. We'll just say post. And then inside of this, we want to include two inputs. The first will be a name, and the second will be an email. And then we want a text area so that the user can actually enter some information. So we'll use the input, and we'll have type of text, and we'll use a class for name. And then we'll also give it a placeholder of please enter your name. And then we'll do the same for input, and we'll give this one a class of email, and the text will also be email, and then the placeholder will just say please enter your email. And now we'll use a text area, and the text area will have a name of message, an ID of message as well. We'll use 30 columns and 20 rows. And then we'll just have a placeholder as well of enter a message. And now we want to have a button that we are actually able to have people click on to submit this. And then we'll give this a type of submit, and then a label of submit. Okay. So now if we head over to Google Chrome, what we want to do is get to some fonts. So Google Fonts, fonts.google.com. I'm choosing Montserrat for this one because I quite like the font. So I'm going to choose regular 400, select this style, and then I'm going to import and just copy this. And then I'm going to paste this into the top. And then I'm going to also paste in this here, and if I now just put that into the comments, so now I have this font family for it, easy access. So now we've got that, we want to actually start styling this. So to see what it actually looks like, let's open the index.html in Google Chrome. And now we have this form that doesn't look very appealing. I mean, we have an easy access way, we have a name, an email, and a text area with a submit button. So now let's give it some styling. So if we head over to our main.css, and if we just say body, and then we want to affect the body by changing the margin to 0 and the padding to 0. Now that just is a conventional thing that we can do with resetting browsers with our CSS, and if we refresh this now, and continue. Didn't work so much with the form, but usually if you have any text, it will just move it along to the very left and the very top. So now we've got this, we want to just add in a font family, so we'll change this and we will paste it in here so that we've got the access to this import inside the body. So everything that's written inside the body will have access to that. And then if we change the background color to E99269, and if we save this, head back here, it's not connected, and that's because I didn't add the link in. So now we need to link, and we'll just link to our main.css file. So now this actually allows this HTML file to access this file and style the browser. So now if we run this and continue, we now have it styled, and you'll see that it's actually reset next to the browser. it's at the top and it's right on the left hand side. So now we've got the body, we want to change the div that surrounds the actual form. So we'll use dot box to access the class name of box. And then inside of this, we'll just give it a margin of 40 pixels and then 0. And if we run this, we'll now have 40 pixels on the top and there's 40 pixels on the bottom, even though we can't see exactly where it is. So now we have a box created that will actually store our form. We can actually start styling the form. So first we're just going to transform, and we'll translate along the x-axis, and we'll do 70%. So now this should push everything over quite considerably. So if we actually change this back to say 30% and then run it, we now have it almost positioned perfectly. And then we'll change the width to 40%, so that's 40% of the parent width, which is the box. So now if we refresh this, we now have it much more bunched up, and then we can move this back over to say 70% and run it, and we now have it much more central. Next, let's change the display to flex, and we'll change justify content to center, align items to center, and also the flex direction to column. And now if we run this, we should have it all laid out in a single row, which we do, or a single column, sorry. And then next we want to add some padding to move them apart. So 50 pixels and 5 pixels, so that will be 50 pixels on the top and then 5 pixels on the side of the actual form. And then we can add a border, so we'll say 1 pixels solid and grey. And this will just actually draw a line around the outside so that we know exactly what we're working with when it comes to the form. And now we can add some border radius, and we'll just say 7%. And then we'll add a box shadow, and this will just give it a little bit of depth, and we'll say 10 pixels by 10 pixels. So that's 10 pixels at the bottom and to the left and right and top, and then 5 pixels of spread and 5 pixels of delusion, I think it is. So it makes it less like, it's much softer. And then we can add a color here, so we'll say 1D3557. And now if we run this, we will have a background shadow to the box that matches the color of the border. It doesn't match the color of the border, but it will do now, sorry. And then if I add in the color there, we can now run this, and it now matches the color. And then what we'll do is just change the background color of the actual form. So we'll say F1 FAEE. And now if we run this, we now have a much lighter color, which is perfect. Okay, so now we have the form laid out exactly how we want it. We now want to affect each individual element, so we can make this much more user-friendly, much more user-interactive, and much easier to look at. So now if we go to the main.css, our HTML file, we have the input with the class name, and then an input with the class email, and then a text area of the ID message. So what we can do here is say .name, .email, and hashtag message. And then we can affect them all at the same time. So width 90%, padding we'll say 10 pixels and 0, and then we'll say margin of 20 pixels and 0. So now if we run this just to get a rough idea of what it looks like, we now have a much nicer laid out form where it's actually easier to look at, much easier to interact with, and hopefully will be much easier to actually get going. So next we can add in the font family. So if we actually was to start typing in here, you'll notice that this is a different font to this. So if we actually change the font family, and we'll add in this one that's up here, just so that it all links together. And now we can say font size of 14 pixels, and we'll change the weight just to make sure that it matches. We'll say it is 400. And now we can actually start changing the specific elements. So if I refresh this, we now have the text written exactly the same, and when we type, it's exactly the same font. But we want to actually start thinking about getting rid of the borders, making it look a lot more sleek, a lot easier to look at. So if we actually change the borders to none, and then we'll change the background color, and we will say the same as the actual form color so that they match and they're kind of visible, but they're not quite in your face. And now we can add a border to the bottom only. So border bottom, and we'll say 1 pixels solid. And then we'll say C81927. Now if I save this, we'll now have a nice red line underneath each one. It gives you an idea of where each one starts, what each one is, but it's not too in your face, it's not horrible to look at, it's quite easy to get on with. So now if we start typing, it will still be black because we haven't actually changed the font color. So what we can do now is just say color and then have that equal to the red that's above. And we'll say outline and we'll say none. And now this will get rid of this blue outline box that we have when we actually click on it. So if we come here, we now have a red hover. So now when I type, we have red font, which is perfect. And that's pretty much the actual inputs of the form done. The same will work for all of them. So now what we need to focus on is the mainly the button. So one thing that we can actually do first is, you'll notice here we have a resize feature. What we can say is if we just say hashtag message, resize none. And now if we come back to here, you'll notice that it's gone. We can't actually adjust it. We have a fixed state. And I'm not quite actually sure what happens when we get to a certain amount of... We have a nice little scroll bar that appears, which is good. So now if I delete that and then come back to Visual Studio Code. Now the next thing we want to do is target the buttons. So we'll say button because we only have one. And then we'll say margin top of 20 pixels. We'll say a padding of 10 pixels and 180 pixels. So that will give us some width either side. Then we'll say a font size of 14, and then we'll use the same font family, so copy that and then paste. And then the background color we will change to 457B9D, and we'll change the color to F1FAEE, and then we're going to add a transition to it. And the transition will just be 0.3 seconds. And we're just going to change the border to say none. And now when we come back here, if we refresh it, we have a nice blue box that actually has a transition on it, but we haven't added anything to it. So the transition you won't be able to see at the moment, but it does look a lot sleeker. We could add a little bit of a border radius or a little bit of a shadow just to make it stand out a bit more. But for now, this is perfect. The last thing that we want to do is just affect it on the hover. So we'll say button and then colon hover. And now whenever a mouse is hovered over this button, we will actually change the background color just to make it slightly darker. And it will actually match the blue border and the shadow that we have. So now if we come back here and run it, and then press continue, if we hover over this, it now changes to be the same color as this. And then if we just try it, so we'll say Chris, and then we'll say learn at beginnerscode.co.uk. Thank you for watching. And now if we hit submit, we have sent our form. However, it's not actually linked up to a backend, so maybe in a coming video, I will actually do the back end for this. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this has helped your understanding on how we can use HTML and CSS to help style forms into something that is both visually appealing and interactive for the user. If you liked what we've been through and you want to learn more, please drop a like and subscribe to my channel to keep up to date. In the coming weeks, I will be releasing a free 30 Days of Python guide, so stay tuned and make sure you're ready to claim yours.